You have various types of what we normally call grays. We didn't call them grays in the military, but you had at least 3 types of the grays.
Oh, we're not gonna take it. Oh, no, we ain't gonna take it. Oh, we're not gonna take it anymore.
Welcome to the Grousing Gazer channel. My name is Klaus and I'll be your host and narrator for this episode. Just to let you know, this video will have some adult language regarding childbirth and will show images of a fetus, hybrids, and a deformed newborn baby. So if you're okay with that, grab your popcorn and refreshments and let's continue. You heard Sergeant Clifford Stone, retired, mention that in 2001 at the Disclosure Conference that he was familiar with 3 different types of grays. We're going to discuss 2 types, the tall and the short grays. Some people have been abducted once by extraterrestrials, but Bret Oldham has been abducted so many times that he could write a book about it. Well, in fact, he has, titled The Children of the Greys. Let's have Bret get us started.
Sleeping one night, and I hear a voice, wakes me up, and it keeps. Of course, you can imagine how quiet everything is out there. You just hear the ambient outside noises, and in the fall, all the bugs are leaving, so it's like super quiet. And I think it's my stepdad, and I remember like setting up and I'm looking around. I don't see anybody, but I wasn't afraid. Just curious little kid, and I was in my underwear and a t-shirt, and I get up and I'm walking barefoot across the cold hardwood floor because there was a light that was coming through on the left side of the house, which is the side that faced the gravel road, and right catty corner to that was there was a window here and a window in the front of the house. And for some reason, like I didn't go to where the light was on the side of the house, but I went to the window in the front, and we had like these no blinds, but just like these sheer old white curtains. And I remember like slowly walking because they kept coaxing me and telling me stuff you would tell a kid, that I have to tell you something, and I have something for you, that type of thing like that. And I raised my right hand up and pulled the curtain like that, and that's when my life changed. Literally a foot in front of me, face to face, with this most insidious creature that I'd ever. I didn't have anything to even compare it to because I was 5 years old. You're not even reading like sci-fi comics or nothing at that point. It's like it was just incomprehensible what I was standing, and the fear was off the charts. And out by the front tree, there was 2 other ones standing back a ways, and but I just remember, the eyes and the head was just like right there, and I blacked out before I could even scream or react. I was just frozen in fear, and the next thing I know, I woke up on the table, just out of my mind with fear, and screaming for my mom. And they were trying to calm me down. I was surrounded by a lot of them, and they actually, in my mind, turned themselves into doctors, which they must have pulled something from, which they're very good at, from your memories. And it didn't help, because I was like, oh, these creatures, and now the doctors. And they finally were able to calm me down, and they led me into... I had no idea where I was at. You're talking a 5-year-old kid. And they led me into an area of which I perceived to be a craft. And it was like a sort of a semicircle area. And one of the things that I learned over the years with these crafts is everything is built in as part of the craft. And there's mostly all rounded edges. There's very few stairs. It's mostly ramps. And this was no different. And there was several of the smaller grays and there was a tall gray there. And they set me down by the tall gray, and he started speaking to me telepathically, which at that time I didn't understand. And and he was saying a lot of really nice stuff to me and telling me that he was befriending me, basically.
Did you talk back to it vocally or telepathically as well?
At that time I didn't. I was just talking to him because I didn't know. I didn't know what was. I had no idea this is what even telepathy is.
Your world's been turned upside down at this point. So.
And really to this day, like I've had a lot of experiences with that same tall gray, and to this day I still have sort of a weird kind of fondness for him. Even though I'm sure that he has ordered a lot of intrusive things done to me, but because what I guess I don't think that the small grays are the actual aliens. I think that they're made by the tall grays. The tall grays are clearly in charge, no doubt about it. The small grays are workers. I think they're biological robots. They all look exactly alike. They act exactly alike. They have a hive mentality. They tell you the same things every single time. They don't answer questions. Completely different than the tall. They dress all the same. Everything's the same. And it's all logic based. It's just like the program. And if you do anything that is illogical, they don't even know that their thought process is not made like that. They don't even know how to react to it.
Wow. Bret Oldham, at the age of 5, not only went face to face with a short gray alien, but was taken on board a spacecraft and was probed by those short grays. And he also befriended a tall gray. The next encounter occurred in the summer, with the windows open to cool the house, and Bret was awoken from his sleep by another bright light while in the upstairs bedroom. The light was so bright he thought it was morning, and as he went down the stairs, Bret thought he heard someone call his name. Who could be calling him? No one was in the kitchen, so he entered the mudroom. He saw 2 gray aliens pop up from outside the mudroom's side windows. He froze in fear. He tried to scream, but nothing came out. Quote, "We're not here to hurt you. We are your friends. We want you to come with us for a while," end quote. Bret felt compelled to obey, so he opened the door and walked out onto the porch. He felt like he was under their control and couldn't resist. Bret willingly held out his left hand. As the first alien took hold of him from the left, the second alien wrapped his spindly fingers around Bret's right upper arm. As they walked towards the field, Bret got a feeling of being very light and weightless and blacked out. He woke up sitting on a backless, cushioned bench, this time wearing the same t-shirt and underwear that he went to bed with. Sitting on his right side was a much taller gray alien, with a short gray standing right in front of him and 2 other short grays further away. Bret was frightened. They were all staring at him. The tall gray spoke to Bret without moving his lips and gently touching his neck. Quote, "We're not going to hurt you. We are your friends. Do you understand?" End quote. Bret nodded his head in agreement. Quote, "We want to learn about you. Can we come and visit you sometimes?" Okay, end quote. The tall gray told Bret when they come to visit him, he could play with other children. The tall gray was gaining Bret's trust and making him feel at ease. He also appeared to be in control and dressed differently. The next morning, Bret awoke with no memory of the previous night's experience. These abductions affected Bret in ways he couldn't imagine. He became shy and withdrawn, hysterical at times, afraid of the dark, insecure, and distrustful. When Bret was somewhere between 8 and 9 years old, he developed a strong interest in the paranormal and space. He read up on Kenneth Arnold witnessing 9 shiny silver objects in 1947, and the Roswell crash in New Mexico. Bret had a strong feeling of familiarity when he read of Betty and Barney Hill's abduction of 1961. In the 6th grade, Bret had another alien abduction where he received nasal implants. This time, he didn't recall how he got on board the spacecraft, but he does remember a short gray on each side of him and another short gray at his head. Bret was completely paralyzed, except he could move his eyes. Long spindly fingers held his head while another short gray stuck a long, thin, glowing instrument into Bret's left nostril. He closed his eyes as the procedure was done because Bret didn't want to look into the alien's eyes. It was done quickly and matter-of-factly, without any communication and pain. Bret noticed that the older he got, the better his health was. By the time he was 11 or 12 years old, Bret stopped getting sick until his sophomore year in high school. That's when he started losing weight and got high fevers. He'd lost 20 pounds in a couple of weeks. The medicines he was given wasn't working. He couldn't walk without assistance. Then, one night, Bret had a dream where an alien told him that he was going to get better very soon. Sure enough, the next day his appetite returned along with his strength and weight. As Bret further entered his teen years, depression set in, along with feelings of helplessness, which transferred into anger. All these feelings were attributed to his abductions. When Bret reached his early 20s, he was searching for a medium with real psychic ability, a medium that could hear the dead. Well, he found one from South America. Bret could tell that Mary was genuine with only a handshake. She sensed Bret's abduction and said softly, quote, "Bad things have been done to you, and you are very angry about it. You have to learn to release the anger and accept the things that you can do nothing about or change," end quote. Bret dismissed the abductions, but didn't understand why he was having the dreams and depression. Bret turned to heavy drinking and smoking, which he thought was a quick path to self-destruction. Now the panic attacks came, which forced him to see a medical doctor. Bret didn't want to take any medication, but rather sought out a hypnotherapist with a background in metaphysics and past life regression therapy. Through hypnotherapy, self-hypnosis, and meditation, Bret unlocked all his abduction memories, which changed his life. Bret was gaining more control over his mind, although he felt that he was being abducted again. Feeling all the symptoms of an alien abduction, being paralyzed, staring into the darkness, only able to see a bright light, the grays leaning over him inches away from his face, the grays telepathically communicating, "We're not going to hurt you." After calming down, they allowed him only to move his head, being naked on a silver examining table with round edges, putting his head on the table thinking, "Oh God, what now?" and waking up in bed. Thanks to the meditation and hypnosis, he was able to recall all the incidences and all the repressed memories. Over time, Bret was able to analyze the grays. The following clip outlines his finding.
Because they're creating this race of hybrids. This is with the grays. And they're getting these hybrids that have human characteristics. They're not interested in our intellect whatsoever. They're interested in our bodies.
Yeah.
They have atrophied bodies, and they're interested in our bodies. But they're not wired like us. And I go into this stuff too. I mean, there's the small grays that everybody's depicted in my experience and personal opinion that I've came to over these years. They're not the actual aliens. The tall grays are the actual aliens. The tall grays I believe, create the small grays. That's why they all look like clones, because they probably are.
Okay.
They're like biological robots. They're programmed. They tell you the same things. It's condescending, really. I mean, it's like, we're not going to hurt you. Blah, blah, blah. It's the same.
You know what? He is not the first person
Redundant things
that has said to us that those grays are drones. The small grays are drones.
Really?
Yeah.
But the tall grays, they don't dress the same. They're much taller. They wear. I've always seen them in robes. The other ones don't run around nude like everybody thinks. They actually have very skin-tight uniforms. They could probably be perceived as not having any clothing on because of that. I was stripped down and I was taken to this rather large room, and and these guys use ramps. They don't like stairs. So anytime they can use a ramp, they use a ramp. And so we're going up this ramp, and I'm looking down, and this room, there's all these like blue kind of cot things with this really strange material. And there's all these humans on there, and they're all nude, and they're all engaged, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm walking up this ramp, and I pass this room on my left, and I look in, and there's all these grown men standing like a packed subway, all naked, and they're all like awake but not awake. They're a zombie state kind of. And I thought I've been trying to figure out what's going on, and I'm cooperating because I have no choice. Mm-hmm. And a little further up, I look in. There's a room full of women the same way. At the top of this room, there's these built-in seats. There's tall grays sitting in them. There's several worker grays around. They take me down to the floor, and they match me up with somebody down there. And you're thinking, how is this sexually arousing? They make it so because they control your mental.
Bret concluded that the small grays were biological robots because they are completely emotionless. They all have the same thought process based on logic. They all tap into the same brain source because they act and speak the same way. They are uncertain how to react at times to Bret's responses, and they work in a, quote, hive mentality, end quote. For example, when Bret was in the intake room, he tried to block their control of his mind, and when the short grays approached, Bret let out a spooky scream, and they took a few steps back. His response was completely illogical. They didn't know what to do. Bret's attention drew more interest to him from the tall grays. He was taken into another room where he was shown destruction on a mass scale. There were large fires in cities. Smoke and fire were billowing out of skyscrapers. The streets were littered with dead bodies and smashed cars. Great floods and tsunamis wiping out everything in their path, and nuclear bombs exploding in many large cities. Bret asked, "Why are you showing me this?" The tall gray replied, quote, "This is what's going to happen to your planet in the future. Your species will destroy your planet," end quote. Bret realized that the tall gray wanted to observe his reaction, so he yelled out, quote, "No, you're wrong. I know you will never let this happen to Earth. You will stop us from doing this before it's too late," end quote. There was silence for a couple of minutes, and finally the tall gray spoke, quote, "You are correct. It is not in our best interest to let your kind destroy itself and your planet," end quote. Bret beat them at their own game and concluded that the tall grays were only interested in human emotion and human sexuality. And speaking of sexuality, remember in the last interview clip with Bret, he stated that nude men and women were in a zombie state and packed into separate rooms? Well, eventually the women were brought out of their room and told to lie down on mattresses in the middle of an auditorium. The men were brought out to stand beside a woman. Ready, set, go. They were to have sex. Both tall and short aliens were watching. Remember that the men and women were in a catatonic state. The grays had control of their minds. Bret too was suddenly aroused and was forced to have sex with a strange woman. The Greys, quote, seem to have a very strong interest in the mechanics of their experiment. They are extremely fascinated with human sexuality, and this is the way they observe it, end quote. By the way, the Greys have been taking Bret's sperm for years now, starting at the age of 15. One time, the Greys wanted Bret to mate with a hybrid, and he was able to push her away and apologize. He describes the hybrid as having, quote, long white hair, so I assumed she was female. She had much smaller eyes that looked grayish in color. She was frail, but not as small as the short Greys. Other than the hair on her head, she was devoid of hair on the rest of her body. Her fingers were a bit longer and more slender than most human fingers, end quote. The Greys were using Bret, so they wanted to keep him healthy. He was never sick, other than the time when he was 14, with a mysterious illness. The Greys told him in a dream that it would go away real soon, and wouldn't you know it, the very next day the fever broke and he got back his appetite. Bret was also accused of memorizing the eye chart because his vision was far better than 20/20. At 19, Bret had a hearing test which flabbergasted the nurse. She said that he heard tones that humans were not supposed to, both in the upper and lower frequencies. One day, Bret discovered a cancerous mole developing on the left side of his upper chest. He showed his mother, and they both agreed that he should make an appointment with his dermatologist. But the very next day, he had a eureka moment. Quote, "It's gone. I woke up this morning and it was gone," end quote. The Greys gave Bret unexplainable physical scars. Examples are a large, straight, horizontal, mysterious scar across his back. The GP called it stretch marks, but his dermatologist called it a surgical scar. An X-ray technician also confirmed that the scar on Bret's back was a surgical scar. But there's only one problem. Bret never had surgery on his back. Years later, more scars appeared on the back at the mid-torso level. 2 circular puncture marks several inches down from his left armpit. The first puncture mark was 1/4 of an inch in diameter, while the second was 3/8 of an inch. Bret gives us another example of how the Greys scarred him psychologically. Let's have a quick review. Bret was 1. Stripped of his clothes. 2. Drained of his sperm. 3. Forced to have sex with a strange woman. Let's see what other psychological trauma would be inflicted upon him. In the late 1980s, Bret was living with his girlfriend, Denise. One day she announced, "I think I'm pregnant," even though Denise was on birth control pills. Her OBGYN requested that Denise be seen more frequently. After a few more weeks, quote, "the ultrasound test showed that the fetus was growing and progressing in a normal fashion. There was nothing in all the exams and tests to indicate any sort of problem," end quote. A week or so later, both Denise and Bret were suddenly awakened by a loud bang and found 5 Greys in their bedroom. Neither one of them could scream and were rendered immobile. They blacked out and awoke nude on separate examination tables. Bret was surrounded by the short Greys and couldn't see anything until the Grey closest to his head telepathically told him that they wanted to show him something. The ET stepped aside and he saw Denise 15 feet away from him with, quote, "her legs up and spread very much like a typical gynecological examination," end quote. The Greys permitted Denise's cries to be heard by Bret. Quote, "Please stop, please don't hurt my baby," end quote. He was enraged, but felt helpless, useless, and weak because he couldn't do anything. Bret looked the other way, but the Grey, standing at the top of his head, quote, "places his scrawny, clammy hands over my forehead and turns it back towards Denise," end quote. He never felt such barbaric rage before. Bret was able to speak again and started swearing at the, quote, these insidious pieces of shit, end quote. He realized that he was giving the Greys exactly what they wanted, an example of human emotion, rage. Their experiment was a success, even though Bret stopped his verbal rampage by focusing on the flashing lights of their equipment. The next day, Bret found himself on the wrong side of the bed. The typewriter that was on the table was now on the floor, and Denise screaming, "Oh my God, I'm bleeding!" They rushed as quickly as they could to the doctor's office, only to be told that there is no baby and Denise must have had a miscarriage. She vehemently denies seeing any tissue, so the doctor schedules Denise for a D&C to clean out the womb. After the D&C was done, the doctor exclaims to the family, quote, "This was the strangest thing I have ever seen. There was nothing in Denise's womb, no remaining tissue at all," end quote. Bret knew what happened. Once the doctor left the group, Bret explained, quote, "They took it, the Greys," end quote. The family was distraught. A couple days later, through conversation, Bret realized that the Greys did not block nor erase their memories. Both Denise and Bret remembered everything. The next time, when Bret got abducted, he wanted to get answers as to where the baby was, the one that the Greys took from Denise. Well, after getting frustrated with the short Greys, a tall Grey entered the room. He replied, "Come with me, and I will show you." Bret followed the tall Grey down the hallway and into a dark room. They both stopped, and the tall Grey said telepathically, "Here is the answer you seek." The room lit up, and Bret found himself in some sort of elaborate laboratory. Quote, "There were rows of round clear vials, each about 2 feet tall. There were tubes hooked up to them, which were filled with a liquid substance. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. As I stood in front of one of the vials, inside the vial was a small fetus," end quote. Bret left the room, trying not to show any emotion. He asked the Grey if it was real or if they were creating that in his mind. The tall Grey filled Bret's mind with more answers than he had asked for. Quote, "He told me that it was real. They needed my baby and other fetuses. They needed human sperm and eggs. They were creating a new species, a hybrid mix of us and them," end quote. Bret felt the tall Grey's desperation and felt empathy towards him. About 2 to 3 years after they took Denise's fetus, Bret experienced an unusual event during another abduction. He was taken by 2 short Greys to a dimly lit, open room and left there. About a minute later, a hybrid walked down a ramp to meet him. Quote, "The hybrid had whitish, blonde shoulder-length hair that was thin and wispy. I assumed that the figure was female. The hybrid child had the same color, whitish blonde hair. She was dressed in the same clothing that the older hybrid was wearing. Finally, the older hybrid spoke to me telepathically. 'She is yours. I would like you to hold her and talk to her,' end quote. Well, Bret was shocked and didn't want to. That didn't stop the older hybrid. She grabbed Bret's forearm and placed it in the hybrid child's hand. Bret knelt down and looked into the eyes of the hybrid child. Quote, "Her eyes were bigger than human eyes, but not as big as the gray alien's eyes. They weren't all black like the gray alien's eyes either. The color was more gray to light blue, and they were very human-like in appearance," end quote. Bret started talking and bonding with the hybrid child. He just wanted to know her name, but got no answer. During an abduction in 2011, Bret woke up on a table in a very large, sparse room. The tall gray that was standing beside Bret and asked Bret to get off the table and come with him. Bret was stripped of his clothes again. They both walked down a long hallway until Bret spotted a human male walking freely without any alien escorts. He was an average male, both in height and weight, had short, dark hair, and wearing a tightly fitting black uniform. Quote, "The poor baby was hideous looking. It looked to be very young, possibly only a couple of months compared to human comparison. The sad little thing was severely deformed, especially the head and facial features. The man had turned the baby around to face me. It had a body and skin like ours, but looked nothing like a human from the neck up. I looked at the tall gray and then back at the man holding the baby. I was determined not to react in any way," end quote. The man holding the baby had a look of frustration on his face and walked away. Bret wondered if the deformed baby was the result of a failed cloning or hybrid experiment. One time, Bret was awakened by tap-tap-taps on his mattress. He ignored them, hoping that they would stop. When they did, he slowly opened his eyes without moving his head, and then a rush of adrenaline rushed through his veins. There were 3 grays lined up side by side down the side of his mattress. There was an oval shape, 8 feet wide and 7 feet high, on the bedroom wall that looked like a desert mirage, complete with misty, wavy lines around the edges. Bret tried to wake up his wife but couldn't. He was paralyzed. He tried to scream, "No!" But before he could get that single word out, Bret was through the portal. Bret was getting tired of all these abductions and was hoping that the aliens would forget about him. Sadly, no. Quote, "The Greys haven't lost interest in me. To this day, they keep coming for me," end quote. He is certain that the Greys can read and monitor his mind due to his implants. One day, when Bret was presenting at an EVP conference, he met another abductee named Susan. A few days after the conference, Susan got together with Bret to discuss their abductee experiences. Susan, too, had been an experiencer. Quote, "Susan explained that she felt that her experiences were my labs," end quote. That got Bret to rethink his experiences with the human male and deformed baby. Then, in 2012, Bret was abducted again. He still woke up naked on a cold observation table, but this time it felt like a bed with rounded edges. Bret could also see what he describes as a counter that you would see in a doctor's office. Bret was only able to turn his head, and he saw a second person on a silver table surrounded by grays. He also saw some other furniture whose shape and size looked, quote, "very much like our Earth-made furniture," end quote. This made Bret feel very nervous and confused. He wanted out of this situation, and now. Then he heard footsteps approaching. Bret turned his head towards the doorway and saw 2 human men wearing tight-fitting black uniforms escorting a naked, short human female with dark hair enter the room. When they got into the light, Bret could recognize that the female was Susan. She appeared to be drugged or in a trance-like state. Bret noticed that she appeared to be tagged with something that was black, the size of a silver dollar, stuck to the right side of her groin area. He didn't have any answers, but, quote, "What I do know is I have experienced 2 alien abductions where there were what I perceived as human military personnel working in conjunction with gray aliens. I don't understand what our own people and or government would be using us for, much less why they would be doing it in conjunction with the Greys," End quote. While researching for images that were used in this video, I came across a most enchanting photograph. I call it Best Friends Forever. Notice the number of digits on the hybrid's right hand. I counted 5 fingers plus a thumb. Perhaps this photo best represents the ultimate goal of the Gray's hybrid program. What's the grouse? First of all, hats off to Bret Oldham for sharing his relationship with the Greys through his book, Children of the Greys. Other people get abducted once, but Bret is living a lifetime of abductions. Back to the question at hand. Why are the Greys abducting humans? Because they're allowed to. They are permitted to abduct as many people as they want to, so long as 1, they do not hurt the abductees, and 2, the abductee is returned. The next video to be produced will reveal the Eisenhower Agreement. Why are Greys collecting human fetuses and/or sperm and/or eggs? Most likely because both male and female Greys are infertile or sterile. Humans undergo in vitro fertilization with thawed Grey sperm and eggs that have most likely been stored for some time in a cryotank. Notice that the tall Greys wanted Bret to have sex with a hybrid, not with a tall Grey female. Why are the Greys so interested in human emotions and sex? Possibly because they are genetically encoded not to have feelings. Remember, they have access to our minds. They experience what we feel. You can't have any stronger human emotions than rage or sexual relations. Bret indicated that other males and females on board the spacecraft were nude. I suspect that nude personnel on board would indicate to the Greys that these were victims or test subjects, while clothed humans were either assistants or monitors. The term monitors was used because human males in tight black uniforms may be military, ensuring that the Greys live up to their agreement that their race made with the president. In the Grouse and Gazer video, selected by Extraterrestrials Part 2 Species and Agenda Reptilian, there was a reference made to a book titled Facing the Shadow, Embracing the Light, written by Naira Isley, who also is military, a United States Air Force radar specialist. She saw a Grey, a reptilian, and 2 humans in the cockpit of an alien spacecraft during one of her covert operations. Regarding the part in the Eisenhower Agreement where the extraterrestrial does not hurt the abductee, does 1, erasing the abductee's memory, or 2, implanting a pleasant memory in the abductee's mind, constitute the abduction as not hurting the abductee after the abductee had a traumatic encounter? I think the Grey is walking a fine line. Please leave your thoughts in the comment section, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell for notifications of future videos like President Eisenhower's Close Encounters. See you next time.